We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot, season number 4, episode number 58. And yeah, man, we back at this thing, man. Hope you guys have had a great week so far, man, as we in midweek, jumping it off, man. And as usual, if it's your first time listening, we on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. We provide hot fire takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. If you're an OG of the show, man, I appreciate the check-in once again. And yeah, man, this thing is ratcheting it up, man, across the sporting landscape. Happily in the month of June, man. We in the month of June, man. This year seems like it's flying by. You know, in the sporting landscape, man, June always represents across the National Basketball Association, the NBA Finals, as the NBA Finals will be jumping off in a few moments. You know I'm going to get into Game 3 and a breakdown of Game 3. Also, you know, a little bit of what we saw in Game 2 as this series is even 1-1. Indiana Pacers taking Game 1 and another miraculous comeback by the Indiana Pacers and the shot heard around the world with Tyrese Halliburton. Then we had Game number 2, and Game number 2, man, was the Oklahoma City Thunder, man, just straight flexing their muscles. You know, it was a must-win game for them. Obviously, you don't want to go down, 2-0, man, losing the first 2 games on your own home court, especially a ball club that won 68 games during the regular season. And so, it was a must-win for them, without question. And the Oklahoma City Thunder, man, they came to play. You saw it early. To me, man, and, no disrespect to the Indiana Pacers, they've had a lot of comebacks during this playoffs, man, historic and epic comebacks across the board and every single round on their way to the NBA Finals. But I knew, man, after the first, 10 minutes, man, of game number 2, man, that game was in the bag. You could just tell just simply from the energy level of the Oklahoma City Thunder, man. And so this thing is tied up 1-1. Now the series transitions to Indianapolis, Indiana. Man, the Indiana Pacers and the whole state of Indiana, man, and their fan base, I know they're excited to have the NBA Finals back in Indiana for the first time in 25 years. And, man, boy, seemed like 25 years ago, I know for me, man, seemed like it wasn't that far away, especially, man, when you talk about the great year 2000, new millennium year. It was just all soaked up into the NBA landscape. And that was, during the era, obviously, of the Kobe, Shaq, Phil Jackson, and the Los Angeles Lakers took on the Indiana Pacers, obviously knocking them off, winning the NBA championship that year. But fan base is ecstatic. And, I feel good for them, man, just to simply get the NBA Finals back. It's a big deal, man, having the NBA Finals in your town, man. And if you're a sports fan, never really experienced just the whole hoopla around the NBA Finals, it's definitely big-time basketball, man. I had the pleasure, obviously being from Chicago, man, just being ground zero, man, the 6 championships in 8 years in the 90s. So, I just can't wait, man. Can't wait for this game tonight. We'll definitely see what it do. We're going to get into a little bit of that, man, coming up very, very shortly, man. Just break down in game number 3 and what I see across that game number 3 look. Also, and I spoke a little bit on this on last episode, man. Across the National Football League, we had Aaron Rodgers, man, joining up and finally joining forces with the Pittsburgh Steelers. For a lot of people, me being included, man, it seemed like it took 800 years for this whole situation to happen. I think that at some point, it was really inevitable, especially from Pittsburgh and their viewpoint, man, really not making no free agent type of moves or no moves, during the NFL draft. You kind of knew that they had one of those wink-wink situations, especially, too, man, you talking about Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers. And Mike Tomlin is a guy that he's straightforward, love him or hate him, especially if you're in the Pittsburgh area. I know a lot of people up there want him out. But, he's a straight shooter, man. And I believe that if Aaron Rodgers was 50-50 on joining the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think Tomlin and the Steelers would have moved on. But this is where we at with it. And, they joined forces in the division, man, one of my favorite divisions in the National Football League, man. It's just nothing just like, that AFC North, man, that North. I'm from NFC North country, but the AFC North, man, is just black and blue football, big time division, man. You got the Baltimore Ravens, of course, obviously the Cincinnati Bengals, in that forte as well, man. And just, the Cleveland Browns, no disrespect to the Brownies, so it's a tough division overall. I think that, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was a must move for them. I mean, you can't win in this league and be competitive in this league without a quarterback. I just think that this ball club is kind of, stout a little bit defensively, even though in my opinion the defense kind of took a little bit of a step back last season. But they got talent over there on the defensive end. Word on the street is TJ Watt obviously not in the the little camp situation they got going on, man. He's looking for an extension. The Steelers was able to bring in DK Metcalf, man, with a trade with the Seattle Seahawks. I saw that coming as far as DK Metcalf getting up out of Seattle. Man, just wasn't getting the ball enough, in my opinion, up in Seattle, man. And so, they, parted ways, and, he's in Pittsburgh now. They moved on from George Pickens. Also, too, they moved on from Najee Harris. So there's been some transition, especially on the offensive side of the football for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If I had to guesstimate right now, man, I mean, it's Mike Tomlin. I could see this team winning at least 10 games. Now, do I see them as a contender in the NBA? I'm sorry, in the NFL? No, I don't see him a contender in the NFL. I don't. Just simply based on the fact, and there's no disrespect to the fan base of Pittsburgh and the Steelers. It's just, for me, the AFC is just stout across the board, just in all divisions. Even, the AFC West, which really have been what you consider a Kansas City Invitational. The Broncos got their weight up. They was a playoff team last year. The Chargers, with Harbaugh, this is a playoff squad. Even though they fizzled out in the playoffs, Justin Herbert had, one of the games we all want to forget. But this is a ball club, with the Chargers, they looking upward. So across just the whole AFC as a whole, can't forget about the Houston Texans, man, in that AFC South. So there's a lot of ball clubs, man, in the mix, just in the AFC alone. And so for me, it's not really disrespectful not to call the Pittsburgh Steelers, a contender. It's just, for me, it's really a wait and see. Do I think that Aaron Rodgers make them a better football club than they were last year with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields? Yes, I do. Just simply based on the fact I just think that he's a better thrower of the football, and that's what you need in Pittsburgh. That's what you need in the AFC North, man, playing in those cold weather cities, once the weather turns. You need a guy to be able to get the ball down the football field. And so I think Pittsburgh finally got that accomplished. It's a one-year deal. So, this might be more than likely Aaron Rodgers' last season in the National Football League. You never know. Whenever it comes to an end for Aaron Rodgers, he's going to put some drama on it, man, because I do think that he's a drama king. But we'll definitely see what that do. Also, pivoting back to the National Basketball Association, New York Knicks. They obviously fired Tom Thibodeau, man, about a week or so ago now. I spoke my piece on it, man. I got affinity for Tibbs, man. This is a guy that got it out the mud as far as the head coach is concerned. First time he came on my radar screen, he was a defensive coordinator, basically assistant coach for the Boston Celtics. With Doc Rivers, they was able to win the NBA championship, with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and Ray Allen, of course. And Tibbs ended up getting a head coaching job in my hometown, in my neck of the woods, in my neighborhood, the Chicago Bulls. And I just thought that whole situation in Chicago with Thibodeau, obviously you got the major injury to Derrick Rose in that whole situation. I just think that, and I've never really felt as bad as I did the day that Derrick Rose, injured his ACL the first go round in the playoff game against the Philadelphia 76ers. I just felt just distraught. I've never really felt that way about an athlete getting injured like that, man, for Derrick Rose. Shout out to D Rose, man. Just seeing him, over in France, man, at the French Open. I think that, TNT did a good job with the telecast of the French Open. I got a chance, to check it out. And first and foremost, man, congratulations to Coco Gauff, winning that epic match, man. Shout out to her. I definitely watched that whole match. And, just love the whole fanfare of the French Open. But pivoting back to Tom Thibodeau, him getting fired, and now where the Knicks are at presently. Because to me, this got James Dolan's hands written all over it. All over it. And I'll explain to you guys why. When you move on from a veteran head coach like a Tom Thibodeau, and Tom Thibodeau, in my opinion, man, love him or hate him, he's one of the best coaches in the league. When you move on from a guy like that, a guy that's used to being in a passionate big-time market, think about it, man. The man coached in Boston, coached in Chicago, now, coached with the Knicks. He knows and been in these big markets, and just the stress and just the apathy of the fan base. And you can't buy that. That experience you can't buy. That experience you can't put a guy in his first go round in the seat up in New York City, never been a head coach really before type of move, and for him to flourish under those situations. You just you can't pay enough for that type of experience. And we saw, many moons ago, not too far long ago, when Steve Kerr, before he went to Golden State, he turned down the head coaching job of the New York Knicks when Phil Jackson was the general manager at the time. And Steve Kerr, fresh off the television booth, he had no head coaching experience at that point in time. He knew what it was. I'm sweet. I'm good. And so now the Knicks have put themselves in a situation to where now, they tried to pick up the phone and call down to Houston to see if Udoka would leave. The Houston Rockets and that young team that just had a great season, getting the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, eventually losing to the Golden State Warriors, but in the playoffs. But this is a team that's still under construction, and the arrow is pointing up down in Houston. So I expected Udoka to say, nah, I'm good. Because some coaches, they know what it is. If you move on from a Tom Thibodeau, a man that took the Knicks the furthest they have been in the last 25 years, and you fire that guy basically 2 days after you get eliminated out of the playoffs, I don't know if it's a desirable job like that. And then, I'm hearing, the story just coming about, they tried to holler at Chris Finch up in Minnesota with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he's done an outstanding job over the last, couple years. Chris Finch has. And a guy like Chris Finch don't want to touch New York City. I'm good. Let me just chill here in Minnesota in the Midwest. I'm good. I'm sweet. And so the Knicks have been rejected twice. And then for the trifecta, a guy that a lot of people thought reasonably could be a situation that he may leave his present situation and go up to New York City, and that's Jason Kidd. And Kidd said, I'm sweet. So it's a real situation now for New York. And to me, it got James Dolan's hands written all over it. Because Leon Rose has done a good job, the general manager of the New York Knicks, over the past 3 years. Big time move. Obviously, bringing in Jalen Brunson, it was a huge move. Probably the best free agent signing, man, we've probably seen them in the last 10 years, damn near. And so I think this has James Dolan's hands written all over it. And we'll definitely see what it do. We'll see what it do, man, coming up for the New York Knicks. It's going to be a very interesting summer. They got some moves to make. I think this team is still close. I think this team is still a contender to be able to get out of the Eastern Conference and get themselves to the NBA Finals. But we'll see what moves they make, man, on the coaching front. So, man, we got a nice little jam-packed show, man, coming up. I'm going to get into the NBA Finals in game number 3. That'll be coming up in a few moments. And so, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. Welcome back. As we're gearing up, man, for game number 3 coming up shortly of the NBA Finals, as the NBA Finals transition to Indianapolis, Indiana, home of the Indiana Pacers. Transition, man. This has really been a Midwest series. Obviously, Oklahoma City, great host town, man, for the first 2 games of the NBA Finals, and it had been a long time since they've had hosted the NBA Finals themselves. But the Indiana Pacers, man, it's the first time for them last 25 years. 25 years ago, man, the year 2000, man, Reggie Miller, Jalen Rose and, company, Larry Bird, shout out to him as head coach of the Indiana Pacers last time they got to the NBA Finals. And so it's back in Indianapolis again. And, those who are familiar with the Midwest knows just the affinity of the state of Indiana has with the game of basketball. From just, high school level, me being right next door in the state of Illinois, definitely, we had our budding rivalry between the two states, but it always was respect due for just the fan base and just the whole state of Indiana for the great game of basketball, man. And so game number 3, man, this series is tied up 1 game apiece. Indiana was able to take game number 1 in epic fashion. Classic comeback from them once again. Game number 2, it was really Oklahoma City, man, flexing their muscles on the defensive end and came out with a high energy level, man, to be able to knock off the Indiana Pacers 123-107. And to me, it's just interesting. I can kind of tell, as I said in the intro, man, it's just the first 10 minutes, the first quarter, maybe going into the second quarter, I already knew what time it was, man. It's just simply based on the fact that Oklahoma City, they're a team that won 68 games during the regular year. And to me, it just really was about game number one. It just let it slip through their hands. And this is a team that really, if you look at the first two games of the NBA Finals, I mean, they've led basically, 99% of the two games. Indiana, they only had to lead for 0.3 seconds in game number one. So the first two games, man, this team has flexed their muscles on the defensive end. In game number one, they really couldn't, in my opinion, capitalize like they would like off of the turnovers that they got in game number one. And this was a team that had a huge layoff, a whole week layoff going into the NBA Finals. So I knew that, Oklahoma City was going to be a little rusty coming in. And it showed a little bit. And you saw it really in the second half when Indiana was able to kind of make their move, man, and steal game number one. In game number two, man, it was just high octane really from the start, from an energy level, from a defensive level. And Indiana, even though they was able to kind of etch back towards the end of the first quarter, we knew that the second quarter, which I can kind of tell, was going to be just the game was going to be decided in the first 5 minutes of the second quarter. And that's what time it was. Oklahoma City was able to stretch the lead out and basically was in the pole position for the rest of the game. Shout out, man, to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, man. This guy, reigning NBA MVP. I mean, just putting up 230 pieces in the first two games, man. It's the most points per average or most points through the first two games of an NBA Finals debut from any player. And I've seen a lot of great ones in the NBA Finals making their NBA Finals debut. And for him to be right at the top, man, shout out to Allen Iverson, who was literally a point behind him just in that. And it just shows, man, just how polarizing this guy is. And he may not be what you consider Madison Avenue. He may not be on the same, popularity level as such as, Kevin Durant's of the world or LeBron James of the world or obviously Steph Curry's of the world. But he put the NBA on notice. And this guy's not going nowhere. He's still a young guy in his 20s. So Oklahoma City is the youngest team to get to the NBA Finals since 1977 in the late, great Bill Walton, Portland Trail Blazers days. And so Oklahoma City is not going nowhere. And game number 3, to me, is going to be pivotal tonight. This is going to be pivotal tonight. Now, a lot of people are basically saying, hey, this is a must-win game for the Indiana Pacers. And it could be, especially just with the energy level that Oklahoma City has garnered, especially in game number 2. As I mentioned, they led 99% of the first two games. But I'm not one to believe that it's a necessarily must-win for Indiana. And here's where I'm going with it. Is that even if Indiana loses game 3, you still got game number 4 in Indianapolis, and you get an opportunity to even the series up 2-2. And to me, any NBA team, man, would love to be in a 2-2 situation. Even though Oklahoma City, they got home court advantage in this NBA Finals, Indiana would take that coming in. Hey, it's a 3-game series. We like our chances. But I do think that this game is pivotal from the standpoint from Indiana's perspective. Because to me, I think a lot of people obviously got Oklahoma City favorite in game number 3. If the Pacers get game number 2, then the pressure is fully on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Because 1, they would be down 2-1, and you got to play game number 4 in Indianapolis. So to me, this is a must-win game for the Oklahoma City Thunder, more so than the Indiana Pacers. Because if you go down 2-1 with a team that basically hadn't really played their best ball in this series, they get that juice from the home crowd, go up 2-1, and you got to come right back in game number 4 on Sunday. You definitely don't want to go down 3-1. And so this is huge. And just piggybacking a little bit, man, on game number 2, there's a lot of talk about Tyrese Halliburton and just his performance that he had in game number 2. Only putting up 17 points. A lot of them points really was in what you consider kind of garbage time per se. And he was a little tentative early in the game. And I think part of that really was because of the Oklahoma City Thunder's defense. Meaning that it wasn't like they were playing what you call lock-up D. They just was basically playing, what I call kind of like a form of a glorified zone. To where they was just having a man and a half in the driving lane areas. And Tyrese Halliburton was never able to rev himself up. And so, he was looking to pass the basketball, which that's really his natural game, is really to kind of get other guys involved. And I can't be mad at that. I mean, that's work for the Indiana Pacers. But when you got a guy like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander putting up 30 pieces and just being efficient as he can, Tyrese Halliburton got to get you a game. And I know game one would be considered, hey, that's the game he got you. But what I mean by that is that if the Indiana Pacers want to win this NBA Finals, Tyrese Halliburton got to at least give you one 30-point game. He got to, because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not going nowhere. At the end of the day, it really only take one game for him to play like that or at that level to make this a real situation for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I just think that in game number 2, it really wasn't about him just not leveling up as a lot of people really thought he could. It simply was the defense by the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, it's the best defensive team in the league. They hit every statistical category, being number 1 in the league across the board. And so it was no different really in this game. And so, to me, game number 3 for him is going to be important. I think Tyrese Halliburton as well, he's a guy that's, to me, is going to benefit the most from this series transition into Indianapolis, because I just think that the home crowd is going to be so revved up and so supportive of him. His pop's going to be there. And so I just think that from an energy standpoint and an aggression standpoint, I think he's going to be in a good place in this game. It's going to be, to me, really about guys like Miles Turner. Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam, they got to be the guys that really kind of do the heavy lifting for the Indiana Pacers. I mean, Siakam only putting up 15 points in game number 2. To me, if he dropped anything below 20 points in this series, I just don't see the Indiana Pacers being able to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder with him dropping anything less than 20 points in this series. And we saw that in game number 2. Miles Turner had 16 points in game number 2. Now, I thought he played okay, to be quite honest. But he got to have one of those double-double type of games, one of those 20-10 type of pops. And so we'll see. As I mentioned, man, the pressure really is on Oklahoma City in this game, because they definitely don't want to go down 2-1 just in regards of it. And I just think that, obviously the others and the bench and just the ancillary players for the the Indiana Pacers, they're going to play at a better level than they did in Oklahoma City. But to me, Oklahoma City, they showed good balance. Even though Shai, he had 34 points in game number 2, was 11 for 21 from the field. I just thought that just the contributions of Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren early in the game basically kind of set the table for the Oklahoma City Thunder, to where they really didn't need super big offensive outputs from those guys later on in the game, because they basically was playing from ahead the whole game. And so, to me, the keys for the Oklahoma City Thunder in game number 3 is those two guys playing well, Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. Because I think that even though Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been playing outstanding, to me he's due for what you consider I wouldn't say a subpar game, but not a 35-40 piece type of game. And that's where, Jalen Williams as well as Chet Holmgren kind of pick up the pieces just in regards to that. I just think that the matchup between those two and also Pascal Siakam and Miles Turner is going to be the litmus test in game number 3. And those who don't know, OGs, I know y'all know, I got Oklahoma City Thunder winning this series in 6 games. I think that if for them to accomplish that, they got to win the game tonight to be able to accomplish that. And Mark Daigneault, the head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder, he learned from his mistake in game number 1 when they went small, and to me, they played right in the hands of the Indiana Pacers. Game number 2, they stayed big with Hardenstein and Chet Holmgren early in the game. Obviously they're going to throw their rotational guys and, kind of empty out their bench a little bit early in the part of the game, as they've been doing all season long. But I just thought that it was paramount for them to keep those guys on the floor just to be able to show that advantage. And to me, I just think that those two guys, Chet Holmgren, and you can throw Hardenstein saying that mix, they have to continue to play big and put pressure on Siakam as well as Miles Turner in game number 3, man, for Oklahoma City to win this game. And for me, as much as I've been spitting, as I mentioned, I got Oklahoma City in 6 games in this series. To me, it's a must-win game. I think this game is going to be a nail-biter. I think it's going to come down to the stretch. But I got the Indiana Pacers, man, still in game number 3 to go up 2-1 in this series, man. In the first game back in Indiana, man, I got the Pacers winning tonight. I just think that the crowd is going to be epic. I think that the others are going to play well. I think Rick Carlisle is going to make those necessary adjustments that he got to make. But once again, as I mentioned, I think it's going to be another close affair. But I got the Indiana Pacers, man, winning game number 3 tonight. And before we get out of here, man, I'm gonna circle back, man. There's been a lot of rumors out there, man, about, across the NBA, man, about the whereabouts of where Kevin Durant will be next season. Looks like all signs are pointing for his exit out of Phoenix with the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns just hired a new head coach out there in Phoenix. Devin Booker getting just that input as far as the head coach is concerned. That let me already know, man, that Kevin Durant is basically 2 foot out of the situation out there in Phoenix. Him and his agent, Rich Kleiman. Word on the street is that they already talking, potential suitors for his services. So I'm going to get into that a little bit, as well as Giannis also, too, coming up, man, before we get out of here, man. But once again, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. Before we get out of here, man, don't forget to check your boy out, man, on Facebook at We on Fire Sports Podcast. Also, too, man, on Twitter at We on Fire Sports. Also, too, man, on Podbean. Also, too, where podcasts could be listened to. Definitely, man, check your boy out, man. I appreciate you guys checking me out again. And, man, before we get out of here, man, we're going to keep it NBA style, man. There's been a lot of speculation and about a lot of talk about the Phoenix Suns and Kevin Durant parting ways, as it looks like Kevin Durant is going to be in a new destination for next season. And you've got Rich Kleiman, his agent, and the Phoenix Suns are kind of trying to work out the best trade destinations for Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, man, at this age now, he obviously want to be in a contending situation and a contending team. There's a lot of teams out there, to me, that would definitely be interested for his services. I had put it out there, man, on the Weekly Dog Sports Betting Podcast, man, just not too long ago, maybe about a month or so ago. I thought that it was in the Bulls' best interest to definitely give the Phoenix Suns a call just to see, man, what they need for his services, man. But I think Kevin Durant, obviously want to go in a more fruitful situation, a contending team situation. And to me, I think, he may stay in the West. I think the Houston Rockets is a primetime destination for him. I think they need a guy and a veteran, a two-time NBA champion to come into the fold. Definitely try to help the Houston Rockets kind of get over the hump. This is a young ball club with a good head coach in Ume Udoka. We seen last season, man, them make strides and, get the second seed in the NBA playoffs in the Western Conference. They obviously fell up short, man, against a veteran-laden team in the Golden State Warriors. But I think the arrow is still pointing up in Houston. Houston has a lot of assets, a lot of young talent that, the Phoenix Suns would definitely be interested in. So I think that, to me, if I had a destination for Kevin Durant, I think that, especially in the Western Conference, that'll be destination spot number one for me. I just think that he's a guy, easy money sniper. He'll be able to transition seamlessly with the Houston Rockets. And so, man, I got Houston really kind of in the pole position for me is the best situation for him. Then you got the whole situation with the San Antonio Spurs. Wemby, obviously, his season was cut short due to the blood clots that he had this season. But, it looks like he's going to be back in the fold, obviously, next year to get geared up and running during the beginning of the regular season. They got a lot of young pieces down there as well. Not to me at the same maybe asset level maybe as the Houston Rockets, but they do got some nice young pieces. Obviously, the Aaron Fox going over there from the Sacramento Kings last season. Stephen Castle winning the Rookie of the Year. So they got some guys down there. I think that, for me, I think that they may be a little bit behind, say, the Houston Rockets. Obviously, they got a new coach, too, with Coach Pop, finally, stepping down as being head coach of the San Antonio Spurs. They're in a nice little transition period, but the arrow is pointing up for them as well. I'm not sure if Kevin Durant want to go into that situation, but, definitely interesting to say the least. Then, traveling over east, we got the whole situation with the New York Knicks. As I mentioned a little earlier, New York Knicks, moved on from Tom Thibodeau. They're now in a situation where they're trying to acquire the next head coach. And I think, to me, for Kevin Durant, it's going to be a turnoff. Because he had interest somewhat in the Knicks many years ago when he was trying to, get on with Kyrie Irving, with the whole Brooklyn Nets situation. They was interested in the Knicks then. But the front office was in shambles. James Dolan was still the owner of the New York Knicks. And so Dolan, still the owner now. You got a situation where you don't really have a head coach at all. You know, you've been knocking on the doors and on the doorstep out here dirty macking, trying to get other head coaches from other teams in stable situations. And I think it's going to be a turnoff, say, for Kevin Durant. Now, from just a basketball perspective, I think that's enough to get the New York Knicks over the hump, depending on what they send back. But I think that he's the guy that actually can't get them over the hump. Obviously, you got Jason Tatum, you know, being injured with the ACL injury, man. I'm sorry, with the Achilles injury in the NBA playoffs. You know, it's not going to be really a situation next season for him where he's going to be able to, you know, get, you know, the ground run. I mean, we looking at maybe March, April, maybe for Jason Tatum, you know, and that's them kind of taking it easy in that whole situation. So Boston could be a whole different situation. So to me, the East, and obviously you got Cleveland in the mix, and there's always going to be a team that jump up from out of kind of that mid-tier that may jump up. Obviously, you can never forget about the Miami Heat. Pat Riley, even though he's, you know, took a little hit over the last maybe 2 months or so with that whole Jimmy Butler situation, the Heat ain't going nowhere. You know, Milwaukee, you know, they could be in a situation of where they are behind the 8 ball and they got to improve their team. You know, this is a playoff team that's made an exit the last couple of seasons in the first round. And now, you know, there's been a lot of speculation about Giannis Antetokounmpo, him trying to, you know, move potentially. But Giannis to me is a loyal guy. Now, loyalty only goes so far, especially, you know, in any relationship, especially in professional sports. To me, if you ask me right now, I would be inclined that Giannis will probably stay put. But this thing can turn on a dime. And we get into, you know, what I call them dog days of summer, man, and July situation, man, in the NBA across the landscape. It could be a situation where Giannis wake up one day and say, man, get me up out of here. So that is to be continued, man, with that whole situation with the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis Antetokounmpo. To me, man, I like, you know, players kind of staying put. You know, as long as the organization is moving and working towards trying to get an NBA championship, he already got one there in Milwaukee. You know, Milwaukee is a smaller market. You know, shout out to Milwaukee, man. You know, grew up right down the street from Milwaukee up in Chicago, man. So I want them to be a relevant, you know, destination because they was irrelevant before Giannis Antetokounmpo hit the scene. And so we'll definitely see what that situation unfolds, man, up there in Milwaukee, man. But it's going to be interesting to see, man, as these dominoes fall, man, as we get into the dog days of summer after the NBA Finals. You know, obviously we got the NBA draft coming up. Number 1 pick belongs to the Dallas Mavericks. Looks like they're obviously going to go with Cooper Flagg. But we'll see what that do, man. But definitely have to speak my piece a little bit of the little rumors out there, man. I've been hearing a little chirping. I've been hearing, man, across the NBA landscape. And, man, first and foremost, man, I appreciate you guys checking me out, man. I know you guys are going to be sitting back, unwinding, checking out Game 3 of the NBA Finals coming up. Definitely will be right back towards the end of the week on Friday, man, just with our thoughts, man, across Game number 3 as we transition into Game number 4 of the NBA Finals. And also, too, what else is cracking across the sporting landscape. So, first and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot.